Everybody, welcome to the Cow Emporium. Today I'm making fermented cherries. Now this is an adult treat because the fermented cherries do contain brandy. And I'll tell you, they are delicious. So to start off with, I have bought just some sweet cherries from our store. We have some sour cherry trees and also a Romeo cherry that is sweet. So I thought, well, you know what, maybe if the birds don't eat all the cherries, I'll try and do this recipe with some sour cherries and see how it goes, because they are packed in a simple syrup, and I'm going to share the recipe with you in this video and in the comments written. And so I mean, if it's in a simple syrup and it has brandy with it, it's probably going to be pretty good. So I just went to my local hardware store and I picked up this. It's not very fancy. I think it cost me $3.50 Canadian, and it's a cherry pitter. So you just put your cherry in there and it pushes out the pit, which I discard into my compost pile or garbage. And then I've already rinsed these cherries, so then they can just go in the bowl and get ready to go in the jar to be fermented. I should also mention that, like, you never want to use cherries that aren't super high quality cherries. If they have blemishes or spots on them that aren't quite right, then you don't want to use those, because these are going to be fermenting on the counter for about 2 weeks to 1 month, depending on where they are and how you like them, because they will ferment and the flavor of the cherry changes a little bit. That's just how the fermenting process works. Okay, so here's my preparations. I have my brandy. No, you guys, I didn't buy like a real expensive brand brandy. And in my measuring cup, I have just over half a cup. Remember, we just topped the jars with this after we put our simple syrup over our cherries. I have myself 12 ounces of water, because you know, this is delicious, so I'm not just gonna make a tiny batch. And I have 1 1/4 cups of just white granulated sugar waiting for me. The cherries are pitted and poked with a toothpick. So we're ready to put our syrup together. I also want to make a quick mention to the jars I'm using. I sterilize these jars, guys, because when you're fermenting stuff, it pulls in wild yeast from the atmosphere around you, aka your home or wherever you are. So you want to start off with your jars nice and clean. So these are cooling because they just came out of the oven. I set them at 225 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm gonna let this syrup just boil for about 10 minutes, so it just starts to thicken up. And I'm gonna let the jars cool down, and then I'm gonna get these cherries into the jar. Okay, now it's time to put our simple syrup into our jars. Remember, I'm going to be adding some brandy to top off the jar, so I'm going to leave lots of room to add some brandy in there. I've made these before. They're really delicious. You could have just a little cherry, pick 1 or 2 at a time. I wouldn't go crazy. Or, you know, have it on some ice cream. Give it a good topping of brandy. Voila. I'm not too worried about these cherries kind of floating around in the brandy. And I'm leaving it a good little space at the top, because when fruits and vegetables ferment, they produce carbon dioxide inside the jar, which causes bubbles to come up as it ferments. And these handy little lids are the 2 different kinds of lids I'm going to be using. This is a ball lid. Those little That little rubber seal allows the gases to escape, and this one here is just like a nipple lid. There's a little nipple on the top that allows, when the pressure builds up, the gases will escape. So I'm just going to put those onto the jars, and I'm going to seal them up and set them on the counter for 2 weeks to 1 month, and then they can go in the refrigerator. This is from my home fermentation starting guide from Catherine Green. I've used this book quite a bit. So, fermented cherries. Here's your recipe, guys. For the recipe, you'll need 8 ounces firm red cherries, pitted, 1/2 a cup of sugar, 1/2 a cup of water, and 1/4 cup of brandy. Using a toothpick, poke holes in each cherry several times down to the pit. Pack the cherries in a pint jar, leaving 1 inch of headspace. In a saucepan, cook the sugar and water over medium heat, stirring to dissolve the sugar. Continue to simmer until a thin syrup forms, about 10 minutes. Pour the hot water over the cherries and top off the jar with the brandy. Secure a top loosely in place and leave the cherries ferment at room temperature for 2 weeks to 1 month, shaking the jar about once a week. When the bubbles stop rising to the top of the jar, the cherries are done. Transfer to the refrigerator for storage.